sessions. The mission of Wisconsin Literacy, as you may know, is to change lives by increasing literacy statewide. We meet organizations and people where they are and help them reach their goals. Whether it's learning a language, gaining skills for a better job, GED or citizenship classes, or enriching one's life, the journeys are varied and the journeys are transformative. They are ongoing and open new doors and new beginnings. That's why we're very honored to have Michael Perry here today to highlight our journey. He will share about his life experiences, how they shaped him, and the value of sharing our stories. A few years ago, in my role as First Lady of Wisconsin, when I was asked to name a favorite Wisconsin storyteller, I said Michael Perry right away. His stories are of real people, friends, neighbors, family, and those he meets wherever he is. I got hooked on Michael Perry when I read Population 485. It's a fascinating read about life as a volunteer firefighter and first responder in New Auburn, Wisconsin. After college at Eau Claire, Michael had worked at a ranch in Wyoming, and he put himself through nursing school. His characters are the actual people and the places in this real town, and he writes with humor, understanding, and care, all with this down-home feel, like he is talking with his best friend. Michael has written several other best-selling memoirs as well that make us laugh, sometimes tear up, and warm our hearts, including Truck, a Love Story, Coop, Visiting Tom, and Motania in Barn Boots. I adore Coop because of the way he really opens up about his family, his wife, his daughters, and the joys and woes of raising pigs. Michael's essays have been carried in national media such as the New York Times Magazine and Esquire, and collected in books including Million Billion and Peaceful Persistence. Like many of you, I look forward to Roughneck Grace columns every Sunday in the Wisconsin State Journal for observations and life lessons from Michael's farm in rural Wisconsin, where he lives with his wife and 2 daughters. He continues to work as a busy writer, volunteer firefighter, and farmer. He's also a musician and tours with his band, The Longbeds. He tells wonderful stories weekly on Tent Show Radio. He also maintains a website, sneezingcow.com, where you can find out more about Michael and even order his books. Michael Perry reminds us that everyone has stories to tell, but he neglects to mention that no one tells them or writes them quite like Michael Perry. Thank you for being with us today, Mike. You are truly one of the greats in literacy. Join me in welcoming Michael Perry.
Well, howdy, thanks for that very kind introduction. A couple of things came to mind while you were making that introduction. One is, this is the most self-serving thing I'm going to do today, or at least I hope it's the only self-serving thing I'm going to do today. I just found out that Rodgers has a book club, and every week he's having the team, or some of the members of his team on the Green Bay Packers, read another book, and I just need to find a way for everyone to tell him about Population 485, because I write about the Packers in there. It just seems like a natural fit. So I'm starting off today with a plug. Also, it was lovely to be introduced so kindly. A couple of little adjustments. Time passes. You know, you write a book and a book is frozen in time, and then time passes. In the book Coop, for instance, I write about having our second daughter. She was born at home in our farmhouse, and that little tyke that was born in that book is now 14 years old. And my other daughter is 21. And I bring that up just because I do get introduced as a farmer a lot. And I was raised by farmers, and I still know a lot of farmers. And I always have to be careful to point out that at this point, my farming has dwindled down to a handful of chickens. And shoot, even people in the city have chickens these days. I had pigs for quite a while. Even then, I wasn't really a farmer. I think my most massive herd of pigs was 5. But I wrote that book, Coop, that was mentioned, and the subtitle of that book was a book about a year of poultry, pigs, and parenting. And I wrote that book, and I'm happy to say that it did well, and they sent me on a tour, and that book was about having a baby and being a dad and raising pigs. And so my wife, after about a year of me being on book tour pretty steadily, pointed out the irony of the fact that I was out promoting a book called Coop, a year of poultry, pigs, and parenting, while she was at home raising chickens, pigs, and babies. So I scaled back the pig operation and haven't had pigs for several years now. We'll see if we get back into it one day. The other thing I always want to mention, just because I take it seriously, is I am still an active member of the local volunteer fire department. I am an emergency medical responder. I have moved to a different fire district than the one I wrote about in the book. But I also always feel it's incumbent upon me to explain that I'm gone so much these days that I am down to making just a handful of calls. I don't want to ever claim any false glory, but I am still active and have made several calls this year and have the gear in my van right now, right outside this building where I'm talking to you from.
Where the fuck you died? Speaking
of that building, so I do live in the country, and we live on an old farm near Falkirk, Wisconsin, and our internet out there is awful. I think it is powered by a very shy hamster who only comes out and runs on the little wheel to power it when he or she is in the mood. So I'm in town in a city building here. There's someone next door to me having a very raucous meeting. Hopefully you won't get too much bleed over from them. But that is why I don't always sit in front of a giant whiteboard. But I'm happy to be here. And what I'll do is I'll tell a very familiar story that I've told many times from Population 485, just to give you a sense of where I'm from and my background. And then I'll read a little excerpt from Coop about learning to read and how it changed my life. And then at the end, I'm more than happy to take questions from anybody about anything. So get those questions ready and I'll be happy to riff on those. By way of introduction to anyone who doesn't know me, and by the way, things have gone. I'm so grateful for how things have gone. I didn't plan any of this. I'm a farm kid. I didn't set out to be a writer, let alone a writer who had books read by more than his mom. And I have, I'm advertised as a New York Times bestselling author. It is true. I had a book that snuck onto the New York Times bestseller list. But this is really a workaday thing. I'm self-employed at this, and I don't ever want to oversell myself. I'm just in there swinging like so many self-employed folks. And so I am just grateful to be here. But the fact is, I simply wouldn't be at this get together virtually or any get together, as a matter of fact, if it wasn't for the book Population 485. Population 485 has had this amazing life for almost 20 years now. It has sold all over the US. It keeps selling. It has sold more than any other book I've ever written. It's been sort of a stealthy thing because it never sold all the books at once. So it never showed up on any big charts or anything, and it never won any big awards. But that book just, just last week I was in the library filled with people who wanted to talk about that book. And so I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the book Population 485. And Population 485, it's that old "Can You Go Home Again" book. It has been written many times by many people, many different ways. In my case, I wrote about going back home to my hometown of New Auburn, Wisconsin, population 485 at the time, after 12 years away. And when I moved back to New Auburn, I wasn't sure if I was going to fit in, because I wasn't the same guy when I went back as I was when I left. And what I like to say is that when I left New Auburn, I was a farm boy, a good student, and a fair defensive end. I returned home 12 years later, a long-haired writer with soft hands and a nursing degree. So there was a certain amount of street cred to recover with some of my buddies in the coon hunting crowd. So as I said, as was said in the introduction, I grew up on a little dairy farm north of New Auburn, Wisconsin. And so as I said, when I came back home, I said I had long hair. I've since had to update that part of the anecdote. There are two reasons I no longer have long hair. And the first, sadly, is just generalized crop failure. I don't mind telling you or showing you. And the other reason that I no longer have long hair is that when I moved back to New Auburn, I was on the fire department, and I'll get back to that. But I had very long hair, waist length. And there came a time when it started to get very thin on top, but was still very long in the back. And I thought, I really ought to cut it off. I'm starting to look like Ben Franklin. But I hadn't made the move yet. And then we got paged out to a grass fire on the down on the railroad tracks south of town. And so I'm right up in the teeth of the flames, fighting the fire, fighting from the black, as any well-trained wildland firefighter will tell you that you must. But I was right up in the teeth of the flames, and all of a sudden, one of the other firefighters ran up and started patting me. Now, normally, you don't get a lot of that. And so I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Man, your hair's on fire." So at that point, I thought, if it ain't falling out, it's bursting into flames. I'm just going to cut it off. So I also said that when I came back to my little hometown, I had to overcome all of the stereotypes that go with being a male nurse. So I grew up on this dairy farm, grew up milking cows, baling hay. In the winter, we logged. I was kind of raised by farmers, loggers, and truckers. At the age of 16, I started working summers on a ranch in Elk Mountain, Wyoming, a regular working beef and hay ranch. And what happened is I worked there for 5 summers in a row. So starting at the age of 16. And so what basically would happen is I'd work on the ranch all summer, and then I would take my cowboy wages and I'd bring them back and I would apply them toward my tuition at college here in Wisconsin. Now, I worked on the branding crew, and I was what they call a header. So the cowboys would rope the calves on the prairie. They'd bring them into the corral, and I would meet the horse, grab the rope, slide down the rope until I came in contact with the calf, and then I would wrestle the calf, as they called it, and hold it while it was branded. And so I would be down in the dirt and the mud and the dust holding this calf, and some crusty old cowboy would walk up behind me and he'd say, "Where are you from, son?" And of course, he had a red hot branding iron in his hand. And I would say, "Wisconsin." "Well, what do you do?" "I'm going to college." "What for?" "I want to be a nurse." And it'd get really quiet out there on the prairie, because I'm here to tell you I was the only cowboy in all of Wyoming who was putting himself through nursing school. I also will never forget when I told my dad I wanted to be a nurse. I wasn't too concerned. My father is a very gentle man, a hardworking farmer, kind. But nonetheless, you're a 17-year-old guy. You're the leading tackler on the New Auburn Trojans football team. And you decide, tonight's the night I'm going to tell Dad I want to be a nurse. It's a moment. So we was walking out to the barn after supper to milk the cows. And I was about 5 paces behind him. I said, "Dad, I want to be a nurse." And he stopped and he turned and he looked at me and he said, "Well, your mother is a nurse. I think you'll make a fine nurse." And he turned and began to walk to the barn. Then he stopped and he turned back. He said, "There is just one thing." And I said, what is that?" And he said, "I just want to be there when they pin that little white cap on you." So, as I said, when I moved back to New Auburn as an adult, but after a 12-year absence, I was basically looking for signs to tell me whether or not I was going to fit in again, whether or not I had made the right decision. And I'm very much a loner. I'm very happy just sitting in my room. I'm not a good joiner. I'd rather just sit alone and write or read. And when I moved back to New Auburn, I didn't belong to any of the local churches. I don't drink, so I didn't go to any of the taverns. I don't play softball. I don't bowl. And I can't polka. So there really wasn't much left to do except join the local volunteer fire department. And I did want to be part of the community. And so I joined the local volunteer fire and rescue service. And I began, and this is what the book Population 485 describes, I began rediscovering my hometown and the countryside in which I grew up, one fire call, one ambulance call at a time. Now, I work with a lot of publicists and editors and that sort of folks from New York City, the East Coast, now lately some from the West Coast. And they find out that I'm on the volunteer fire department and they say, "Oh, you must be very brave and noble." And I always go, not especially. And then I explained to them that where I'm from, man, small towns really need all the help they can get. And I said, well, I always joked that, well, I had the two things they were looking for, a pulse and a valid driver's license. And the other part of the story is that when I moved back to New Auburn, my two brothers and my mother were already on the fire department. So I almost had to join just out of peer pressure. But I moved back, I joined the fire department, and I'm just looking for signs to tell me whether or not I've made the right decision. And the biggest event of the year in New Auburn, Wisconsin at that time is Jamboree Days. Jamboree Days consists of a 5-minute parade and a softball tournament. And the proceeds from the softball tournament go to support the local park. So as members of the volunteer fire department, we're expected to pitch in and help run the softball tournament fundraiser. Now, directly adjacent to the softball field is a beer tent. And I ain't gonna lie to you, the beer tent is where most of your big time fundraising occurs. And as volunteer firefighters, we ran the beer tent as well. Now, at the time, New Auburn had only one softball field, that's still true, and there were no lights on the softball field. And the tournament became very popular, and so in order to get all of the teams through the brackets, they had to start playing softball at 8 a.m. on Sunday or Saturday morning. They played all day long until dark. They resumed play at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning and played all day long until the tournament had been resolved. So shortly after I moved back, and I'm still trying to figure out if I'm the right guy or if I've made the right decision and if I'm going to fit in, I get assigned the duty, the chief assigns me this duty of going down to the park on Sunday morning of Jamboree Days to help clean up the beer tent, get it ready for the day. So he sends me down there with one of the old timers on the department, a guy named Bob the One-Eyed Beagle. And he gets his nickname from the fact that he has one eye that is severely off kilter. And sometimes people get upset with me when I describe that. Bob's a friend of mine. He read what I wrote in the book. He approved it all. But when people get upset about me talking about the fact that his one eye doesn't track, I just tell them he's aware. Like, he's checked it out in the mirror and everything from both angles. And also, Bob is one of these guys. And you all know somebody like this. You may not know my Bob, but you know someone like this. That eye is the least of his problems. This is a guy, he's got one eye, one kidney, and two ex-wives, both of whom work at the only gas station in town. So he's got to run 9 miles south to Bloomer every morning for gas, coffee, and chew because they just won't serve him there at the home place. So me and the Beagle, we get sent down to the park on Sunday morning of Jamboree Days to clean up the beer tent. We get down there, it's 8:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. The first softball game of the day is already underway. We're in the beer tent picking up paper plates and plastic cups and napkins when this guy wanders in off the street. He's not a softball player, he's just a civilian. And he says, "Can I get a beer?" And I said, well, it is 8:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning, but Beagle, you've been on the department longer. You make the command decision. And so the Beagle says, well, I guess there's no law against it. And he goes around behind our little makeshift bar there and he draws the guy a beer and he sets it down and the guy hands his money over. He puts both elbows on the plywood. He raises the beer to his lips. And he's just about to take a pull at the foam when he hears the crack of the bat on the softball field adjacent, and he freezes. And then he looks, and then he brings his lips back in line with the beer, which has not moved, and says, "A little early in the morning for softball." And it was at that point that I said, yes, I am back among my people. So that's the intro to kind of where I come from, my background, the book Population 485. One of the things that I mentioned it in Population 485, but I really started to write about it in this book, Coop, that was mentioned, is that in addition to being raised in rural Wisconsin, I was raised in an obscure fundamentalist Christian sect. And I like to say that because it sounds scary, but it was actually very gentle and loving. My parents are wonderful people. I look to them to this day for guidance on how to try to be a better person. Can't always live up to them, but I do my best. But one of the side effects of being in that particular church is we were not allowed to listen to the radio. We didn't go to movies. We didn't have a television in the house. Couldn't go dancing, things like that. And that maybe sounds very constricted, but in fact, growing up in rural Wisconsin, we were never bored. We never ran out of things to do. But there was something else that offset it. And that was that my mother was a voracious reader, and she filled our house with books. And I'm going to read a little excerpt from Coop about my mom teaching me to read, and then I'll talk a little bit about that and how it changed my life. My mother taught me to read when I was 4 years old. Mom is a compulsive reader. She reads for pleasure. She reads to edify herself. But more often than not, she reads because she can't help it. I understand. The minute I find myself sitting still, I start rummaging around for printed material. Pretty much anything will do, a book or magazine, sure, but also cereal boxes, the weekly shopper, the underside of the Kleenex box, or the back of the toothpaste tube. I can recite by heart. Crest has been shown to be an effective decay preventive dentifrice that can be of significant value when applied in a conscientious program of oral hygiene and regular professional care. As a toddler, whenever I saw Mom reading, I begged her to read to me, bugged her actually to read to me. And she did, every day. One day, as I pestered her with my copy of Winnie the Pooh while she was settled with a book of her own, Mom set down a rule. She would read one chapter of Winnie the Pooh aloud. This was the original text-heavy version, not the picture book version. But then I had to sit there quietly holding my book while Mom read a chapter of her book to herself. It worked and became standard procedure. It took me years to recognize the power of this gift. Mom taught me to love the idea of sitting quietly with a book long before I could make out the words on the page. In time, I began to recognize letters and make attempts at small words, so Mom sent away to a Chicago newspaper for a phonics book. When it arrived, she started at the beginning and worked through page by page. Sample lesson for C and K. This cat has a bone caught in his throat and he is trying to cough it up. So he says ka, as in cat and kitty. Soon I could read on my own, although not infallibly. Dad tells the story of me pointing to the tailgate of the neighbor's pickup truck and saying, "Look, Dad, F-O-R-D, truck." So I wasn't quite as smart as I thought I was. I love to tell that story, though, because what a blessing to have a mom who, and to have a mom who was available, who loved to read and sat me down and read with me, not at me. And so I realized what a privilege it was to have someone who took the time to teach me to read when I was 4 years old. And what happened then is I just started reading voraciously. Part of it was not having a TV, not going to the movies, but Mom just taking us to the library, our little local library in the town of Chautauqua, Wisconsin. And we would come home with stacks of books. And one of the things that I always liked, I love language and I like big words and beautiful words, and sometimes that gets in the way, because what I really want to convey is that I took my own sort of journey. Yes, I had someone who taught me to read early on, and that gave me a lot of advantages. But the thing that I find funny now that I've been writing for a living for over 20 years, is that growing up, here I was, this farm kid in rural Wisconsin, milking cows, helping with the chores, but hiding out on the porch to read books. And I was reading piles and piles of books. And by the way, some of them difficult and classic, if you will, but most of them just silly and fun. And I like to read about World War II fighter pilots, and I used to read old cowboy novels. But the thing that I find interesting in retrospect is never once did it occur to me that I could write a book. As much as I loved books, as much as I devoured them, to me, authors, it was always capital A, author. They were someone distant. They went to different schools than I went to. They didn't look like a farmer. They were operating in some mysterious place that people like me didn't get to go to. And so when I look back now, I'm just so lucky that I stumbled into writing. And one day also realized, no, any of us can write, any of us can read, any of us can create these worlds. And so I guess what I'm trying to convey here is that words are yours. They are yours to own. They are yours to use as you wish. I tend to use them in two different ways, and I get criticized for it sometimes. A lot of my writing reads just like I talk. I grew up talking, me and my brothers, we was down to the cafe and we was going to go deer hunting later. I love to write like that, the rhythm of that, the taste of that. And I love saying things like ain't and we was and incorrect English, because that's how it sounded growing up and that's how I feel comfortable. But I also love beautiful, fancy words, hard words, difficult words, challenging words like declivitous. In my mind, words have shapes, colors, and different sizes, and they act differently. And there's a word called synesthesia, where you see music and words and as shapes and colors. And I'd say I have a low rent version of that. It's not super psychedelic, but I do see a word like declivitous. It's a shiny word with lots of sharp points in it, and it's got chrome and it's got a beautiful rhythm. Declivitous. Part of the fun of that word is just saying declivitous long before you know what it means. And as it turns out, it just means a sharp decline. So I joked with one of my firefighter buddies one time. Somebody slipped on a ladder, and I said, well, that ladder is mighty declivitous. And he maybe didn't know what declivitous meant by the dictionary, but he knew what it meant by the way I told the story and made the joke. And I get criticized sometimes. People go, oh, you want to have it both ways. You want to write on one page like you're just a regular blue collar guy, and then on the next page you want to use a word like declivitous. And my response to that is, if I'm using big words to show off, that's silly. That's a tin horn trick. But if I use a big word because it's lovely and beautiful and it has wonderful rhythm and it fits the line and it's fun to say and it's fun to read, and I looked it up one time and found out that it meant something that I would like to convey, well, then I'm going to use that word. Because what it really comes down to for me is that whether you're a new to reading or if you've been reading for a long time, no matter your background, no matter where you come from, why should we let the fancy people hog all the fancy words? Those are our words too. People sometimes say, I had to look those words up in the dictionary, and I always go, well, where do you think I found them? I didn't find them cleaning calf pens. So I'm starting to ramble a little bit. So I'm checking my time also and realizing that you're probably trying to stay on the schedule. And I am right at about within 2 minutes of where I'm supposed to take 10 minutes worth of questions. So I'm assuming there's someone online here who's going to facilitate that. And I'm happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Well, and we invite people to add their questions to the chat. But I have one, Michael. Where do you get your inspiration from? Clearly from where you came from. But when you come up with a new story idea, where does that come from?
Well, I have more story ideas than I know what to do with. I have notes for books I'll never write if I live to be 150. So I've never really had trouble coming up with story ideas. It's more seeing the story in the details or in the imagery. Or one of the things that has helped me is I write a weekly column for the Wisconsin State Journal called Roughneck Grace, and I got to hand in 50 to 51 of those a year. And I literally just hit send on the one for this week before I got in the car and drove into the big city where they got the good internet and all that and that there. And one of the things that's helped me with the column is because you have to write one a week, in addition to all the other things I'm trying to get done, I don't have a lot of time to dwell on it or make it perfect or make every line as beautiful as I might like. And so I've learned to try to see a story in a very small image. And for instance, Monday night, for the second time in my life, I got to go to Lambeau Field and watch the Packers get real healthy against the Detroit Lions. And I love football, and some people are surprised to find that out. And in this column, I just realized the story there isn't me going to Lambeau Field. It's part of it. The story isn't about me playing football in high school. The story is about just that moment of why does someone like me, who mostly likes to be alone and wants to just write, why do I love being at a Packers game? And what it comes down to is it's a point of unity. So if you see someone in the parking lot or at the gas station with that squashed G, you know that despite all of the fractiousness and fighting going on around us these days, On that particular point, we overlap. And I love the idea of being able to appreciate beauty and poetry and art and all these thoughtful things, but also just to watch, to jump out of your seat and scream when Aaron Rodgers throws a ball 50 yards through the air to someone he never should have thrown it to, and Davante Adams just brings it right in. That's poetry. There's beauty in the arc of the ball. So what I'm trying to say is that often the stories are everywhere. They're overwhelming almost. The key is just to find that one little element that you're going to hang the story upon. And again, the answer to your question is actually about a 3-day seminar, but that's what I'll give you right now. I saw 2 other questions pop up. One was, how's Tom doing? Tom is doing, I want to phrase this carefully. He's doing well. He's still living at home. And I just talked to him the other day, and my wife and I are going over to visit him here in the next couple of days. He's definitely starting to show some age. He's having some macular degeneration, which for him is pretty devastating because he just wants to work with his hands and in his shop. And he's at a point now where he actually can't do that anymore. And he just stopped driving. He made it into his 90s. But when I called him on the phone the other day, it was the same old spirit and the same old story. So he's still got that rawhide comportment and sense of humor going. I saw one other comment, and by the way, I'm seeing just a little bit of these comments as they pop up, so I'll do my best. And if you need to redirect me, feel free. Wondered when I would come back to the South Dakota Book Festival. So when someone invites me, be happy to come back.
And they want you to bring the long beds.
Yeah, well, the long beds will travel, although I run the band like a business because it is a business, and so they gotta pay for airfare for them long beds, not just me. But we had a blast the last time we did it, and we've only we've played a bunch since then, so we even have some new songs and some new stories. So we would love that.
Congratulations! I have something to say.
Go for it.
My name is Jim, and I created a postcard poster of Wisconsin and put a lot of cool, quirky stuff on it. And for your town, where your town is located, I put down POP digit with 485, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that is on my Wisconsin poster, which is available at Bound to Happen Books in Stevens Point and other places. And I want to congratulate you for being on my language of landscape map of Minnesota or Wisconsin rather.
Well, thank you, man. I'll take that.
Wonderful.
There's different things. I always say I've never won a Pulitzer or any big fancy awards, but that book has brought me all these little wonderful niche joys. I'm going to try to do 2 quickly while I'm thinking of it. One is they put the cover of that book on the New Auburn population sign. So when you drive into New Auburn, the book cover is there. They wanted to put my name on there, and I asked them not to because that made me really sweaty and nervous and uncomfortable. But the book cover makes me happy because the book represents the place, and it was a privilege to write about that place. And the other thing I mentioned, I think in my own intro of my own intro, that I'm not famous. I haven't sold 1 million books. I've sold more books than I ever dreamed was possible. But little things happen every once in a while. And I mentioned that I was at Lambeau Monday night. That was my second time to watch an actual game in Lambeau Field. The first time happened because I got an email out of the blue one time from a gentleman who said, I'm a fellow who grew up rural, and then I got a job that took me all over I traveled all the time and spent most of my time in big cities. And then after I retired from that, I got another job where I travel all over big cities in the US. And I take your book Population 485 with me because I love to read it because it reminds me of where I'm from, even if I'm in a big city. And he didn't say what he did or anything. And I can't keep up with my emails anymore. I have a template that I reply with, but I try to put a little note in there. And I said something about, thank you for taking the time. And I don't know what you do, but I'm very grateful that you take me with you on the road. And he replied, and it turned out he had played in the NFL for 12 years, I think, mostly for the Dolphins. And then at that time, he was a coach for the New York Jets. And he said, in his reply, he said, by the way, if the Packers ever play the Jets, let me know. I'll get you tickets. And I went in the house and I told my wife, I said, this really cool thing happened. This Jets coach likes population 485, and he said we could go see a Packer game. But I said, but when are we ever going to be in New York City when they're playing the Packers? And my wife looked at me in the way that she often does and said, you know, the Jets do come to Green Bay. And sure enough, they were coming in a matter of weeks. And so little cool things that happen to you, even if you don't win the Pulitzer. Sometimes you get to go to the Green Bay Packer game and go down on the field for warm-ups and everything. And sometimes you get to be on a poster. So thank you very much for that.
Good. Well, one last question. It says, I love having the audio version of Truck. The editing is a little crazy. Would you comment on that? Do you have any control over what happens?
The editing of the
audio version.
The audio?
That's what she says. It's a little crazy, though.
That's interesting. This is the first time anyone's ever raised that, and that's been out for about over a decade. So I'm not sure what. The answer is I control, I do my own, almost all of my books are narrated by me. For some authors, that doesn't work. In my case, they feel that my voice is a good match to my writing. I have a book called Scavengers, which is a fiction book. The protagonist is a young girl. That one, an actor from New York voiced that one. But no, I don't have any control over the editing. That's really odd. I'm not questioning the person, but I'm wondering, if it's fades in and out, or if they got a bad copy, or if it's on CD, or if it's streamed, or what. There are things floating around out there that are knockoffs, and sometimes, but it's hard to say. I'm sorry that listening to an audiobook that's not edited nicely is very, very disruptive. So I'm sorry that you're having that experience.
And one last one, I really enjoy your column and reading it every week. There are so many things I identify with.
Oh.
What area of nursing did you work in? Now we know you're riding the ambulance, but did you have another field?
So right out of nursing school, I worked for an oral maxillofacial surgeon doing surgeries, and some in the hospital and some in the clinic. And then I took a job, my last nursing job, which was my second nursing job, because I left nursing to go to write, thinking it would be a few months and I'd be right back at nursing. And that's still kind of the fallback plan, but somehow it's still happening. But my last nursing job, I worked on a rehabilitation unit, a neurological rehabilitation unit, taking care of folks who had traumatic brain injuries, closed head injuries, strokes, spinal cord injuries, that sort of thing. I really liked that form of nursing because at the time I was also in the same town working on the ambulance a lot. And so I more than once was the first person to an accident scene and then took care of that patient, then packaged, got them to the hospital, did all those emergency interventions you do to try to keep someone alive, and then had them as a long-term patient up on the neuro unit, and was able in one case to discharge someone doing much better. And to be able to follow that arc as a healthcare provider, I think was a privilege.
Wonderful.
I'm sorry I'm not getting everybody's questions. You can always email me. If you go to sneezingcow.com, which I
You mean
put
that
up
right
here.
there on the whiteboard? Yeah.
There we go. You can email me, and as I mentioned already, I get more emails than I can answer at length, and I get people who want me to read their manuscripts or critique things. And I get piles of books and CDs every week of people. I just simply can't do it. But I read every single email I get, and I do my best. As I said, I have a template response, but I always try to give a line or two so that I really did read it. But just very grateful to be part of this. And congratulations and thank you to everyone we need literacy desperately. And I can't say it any better than I'm sure you've all been saying it, but I'm so grateful for the work that's being done in that arena.
Great. Well, Michael, thank you. We'll turn it back to Michelle Erickson.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing your journey with us. I really loved hearing about your story going to the public library with your mom and bringing home stacks of books. is something that deeply resonates with me and my kids. And it is something that all of our literacy agencies across the state are trying to do for their adult students so that they're making those same journeys to the library with their kids and reading. So thank you so much for sharing that. I am Michelle Erickson. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Literacy, and your support and commitment to literacy for statewide changed lives. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Building the capacity of our 70 literacy agency members is really the heart of our mission. And I thank everyone who participated and completed their journey through literacy. And now we're just going to take a few minutes. This will be really quick, just to select the raffle winners for the $100, $250, and $500 cash prizes that will go directly to the literacy agency that that you put into your vote. So we're going to do that right now. Liz is going to start the raffle for the $100 prize.
All right, so number 32 is Literacy Network. So that's the $100 prize, Literacy Network. All right, next up is the $250 prize. That one is Racine Literacy Council. So congratulations, Racine Literacy Council. And then for the $500 prize, oh my goodness, that would be State Line Literacy Council. So congratulations to all our winners.
That's terrific. Congratulations. And again, thank you everyone who joined and signed up your favorite literacy council for the raffle. So I'd like now to just join me in welcoming Steve Munt, who's a commercial farm ranch operations manager at American Family Insurance, and he's the board chair of Wisconsin Literacy. He's going to share a few words. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and thank you to Michael for being here, and all of you for attending the Journey's End conversation with Michael Perry, as well as participating through the Journey Through Literacy that we undertook. Special thanks to New Glarus Brewing Company for sponsoring the entire Journey Through Literacy as well. As we heard, each Journey Through Literacy is unique. Whether you're a parent going back to school to have a better life for yourself and for your family, a refugee coming to a new country, learning to a new language, or a justice-involved person working for a positive re-entry, every journey leads to a better future. And your gift to Wisconsin Literacy helps sustain our Literacy Coalition. We reach over 16,000 adults and families across most of Wisconsin. And Mike, I think you really gave a great story on how literacy is not a one-time thing. It's a lifelong tool that lasts across generations. I know I am super excited to be sharing my journey with my 6 grandchildren as we learn to read books together and tell each other stories. So your donations to support Wisconsin Literacy really will help support our learners, our literacy members, workforce efforts, and health literacy programs. If you would, please take a moment and consider donating at our website, which is wisconsinliteracy.org/donate. Thanks again for your gift of your time and your talents and your treasures. Thanks much and enjoy your journey.
Thank you everyone for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.